WCLU news coverage of the 2020 general election is brought to you in part by HVAC Services.
Alexa, HVAC repair services, please.
Professional and friendly, great service and great products. If you want HVAC done right, go with HVAC Services.
Home of the same-day guarantee, with heating and cooling coverage on any brand at any time.
Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us, Congressman Brett Guthrie.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in today. Of course, we are looking forward to asking you some questions about your re-election campaign here to move forward. Your 12th year in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, it's six terms. It's hard to believe how quickly it's passed. But in a 2-year term, it seems like you're always up for re-election, and that's how our founding fathers intended it. You know, we're the House closest to the people and more attuned to visiting with people. It's easier for me that has a section of Kentucky to interview with you than probably our U.S. senators or obviously our president. So this is, I believe, the gateway for people to have their voice heard in Washington, and I think we have a good office to do that.
For sure. That's one thing. That's actually my first point here was just how fast does a 2-year term run by for you, and does it feel like you're constantly...
Well, for me, and every race is important. I don't own this seat. I've got to campaign for it and move forward. But I have some friends that are in more competitive, where the Republican and Democrat balance is probably more even than it is for me here. And I think for them it's a 2-year sprint. By the situation that I'm in, and like I said, I've taken nothing for granted. But I, instead of always trying to put a campaign together, I think I can focus on policy, and that's what I've done. And I've not always been one on television kind of promoting myself or doing other things. I think what's most important to people here is how are we going to get our economy moving again, get things back to normal, and that's what I focused on. So not being in a what people call a targeted district, because I'm not assuming a vote from anyone. I just want to clarify that. But not being in a targeted district means you're not out there trying to raise $3 million every 2 years, and therefore you have the opportunity to really focus on a good policy, and I think that's what I try to do for the people.
And talking about the past 2 years, just some of the highlights and even the lowlights of the past 2 years.
Well, the low light was, I guess the lowest point was when we handed the gavel from Paul Ryan to Speaker Pelosi, and it's not just Speaker Pelosi, we disagree. It's just that when you lose, when you're no longer the majority party, you can't set the agenda anymore. So all the things like trying to get through a COVID relief package that I think we need to do, we need to move forward. Speaker Pelosi sets the agenda. She calls what bills are up to vote. She calls what's going to happen, like we're seeing in the Senate with Senator McConnell, and whether or not they're going to vote on a Supreme Court justice is Senator McConnell's call. It's the same thing in the House of Representatives. And so when we want to deal with COVID and helping businesses and small businesses, and Speaker Pelosi says, well, the Republicans want to help the economy and small businesses, and I got members of Congress that want to legalize marijuana, cut the police, and do all these other things, then she puts that in a bill that we just can't support. And until she's willing to back off of that, everything's kind of in flux. But when we have the gavels in our hands and we're the chairman, we're the speakers, we're of the majority party, you get to set the agenda, and it doesn't guarantee you're going to always succeed, but you can say these are the things we're going to vote for, these are how we're going to vote. And I think in a better way, that's more in line with the people of the 2nd District for sure.
Looking towards, just a little bit of insight for COVID-19 relief, as well as we work towards a vaccine. What can you give?
Because the thing that, a lot of people want to just absolutely criticize the federal government's response to, particularly the president's response, and it's just the criticisms that are being levied at it just aren't there, in my opinion. We got hit by a pandemic. We needed 1 billion masks it wasn't just the people that were having hot spots for actual cases, but everybody across the country, all of a sudden everybody's wearing masks, everybody's wearing PPE, all these other things. And so, we had a strategic national stockpile, but it wasn't it wasn't even designed to, nor was it prepared to give a mask to every single person working everywhere in the country. It's really designed for hot spots. And so we had to move forward. We now have an excess of ventilators. We have excess of hospital capacity. So all these things, it took a few weeks to put together, and that's what they keep criticizing the president for. Having said, so if you think of where we were in March and April, it was traumatic. I think when the president said we're going to shut down the economy to slow the spread, to keep from overwhelming our hospitals. In March and April, so if you're 70 years or older and in intensive care, not necessarily get the virus, but in intensive care. So somebody 70 years or older in intensive care, 1 out of 3 were dying of COVID. And so it was a traumatic thing. But now it's down to 2 out of 100. If you're over 70 in intensive care, it's 2 out of 100. We've learned a lot more. The president put in place a thing called Operation Warp Speed. So all of the treatments the president received, so he's probably a good example. He's 74 years old. He would, I think he doesn't like when people say this, but a little bit overweight. And so he would kind of fit into the category of somebody that could really get sick from COVID. But he had everything that he took, remdesivir, the vitamin D, the zinc, all these other things that he took, everything but Regeneron, which is the monoclonal antibodies, is available to the public. And the only reason Regeneron's not, it just hasn't been proven out, but safe. But he said, hey, I'm willing to do it. So it's worked for him. And they're looking at emergency use. So we're getting better. So people aren't dying from it like they were in the springtime. So there are people dying, but not at anywhere near the volume. But people die from the flu too, but in the volumes of that. The second thing is he unleashed the federal government. Maybe one of the greatest scientific efforts, it's right up there with the Manhattan Project, which is to save lives instead of course, that one probably in the end did. But it's one of the greatest scientific efforts in human history to come up with a vaccine within a year. And if we're not days away, we're weeks away from having a vaccine. There's an independent science board. The FDA decides it. So people say, when we're going to have a vaccine? And so the answer is we're going to have a vaccine when it's safe and effective, according to data supplied to an independent science board and approved by the FDA. And so when that happens is when the companies get enough data to say, we know it's safe and effective, we're going to submit that. Pfizer's already said it's probably going to be by the end of October, maybe early November. But most of the 4 companies producing vaccine, and they're making them now, so we'll start receiving them after they move forward. So I would say by December, we're going to have at least 1, if not 4 vaccines by December. So then it takes about 6 weeks to build the antibodies. Each vaccine's different, but so I'm just going to speak on the average vaccine. The average number, about 4 to 6 weeks to get the antibodies. So you take a vaccine, it's 4 to 6 weeks to build up the antibodies. Then they're doing a booster to make sure you have the antibodies you need to be safe and effective. And so we'll know. So they started these in June. So in December, if we're successful, they say, we know for 6 months you don't get the virus. And so there'll always be a group of people in these studies, 30,000 people in each study. So it's not a small number of people that will be 6 months ahead of the rest of us. So people say, how long is it going to be a one time and you never get it again? Are you going to have to get an annual like the flu shot? How's it going to be treated? And the answer is we don't know that. We'll know it's safe and we know it's effective for 6 months. And so I think most people say, if I can take a shot in December and I don't have to worry about coronavirus for 6 months, and I have to take another shot in 6 months or a year or whatever, I think most people would buy that and get back to normal and get kids or young people back in school. But they're also producing these vaccines as we speak, which is not typical. So if they are safe, if they're not proven safe and effective, we dispose of the vaccine. If they are, then we'll have them ready to go. And that was the president's call as well, because you're not supposed to make pharmaceuticals until you get FDA approval.
Right. And, one thing, and they talked about with it being, closer to December when we'll see these trials and things like that. Yeah, another question that's brought up related to COVID-19 is stimulus. President Trump has stalled those talks until after the election. So if we're elected and looking forward to, towards the end of the year and after the election, what do you see on insight for stimulus and relief?
Well, hopefully, and it's still not, I know the president has said that we're waiting till after. So what happened is, just the background on that, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act. So there's already a $3 trillion stimulus bill that passed. It's called the CARES Act. So we needed another. It was designed for short term because a lot of very smart people thought this would end after it got warm again, kind of like the seasonal flu. It's a coronavirus like the flu. H1N1 went away, SARS went away, MERS kind of played itself out. And the question was this going to play itself out, or is this going to be that virus we feared that sticks around? Unfortunately, it was the one that we feared. But a lot of the CARES packages were designed for short term to get us to June and July. Now, what's happening with COVID is a different story. But the reasons the HEROES Act, they were saying we got our men and women in uniform, police officers, that if we don't do this, they're not going to get their retirement. So they tried to play on the sympathies of that. But this was pre-George Floyd. It was prior, before the Breonna Taylor case had reached the level of publicity. I think the incident had happened, or the tragedy had happened, but not where we were. And so when Speaker Pelosi says, all right, I'm just going to offer a compromise bill and pass it. So I say all that to say this. We went from 2.8 trillion. They passed a 2.2 trillion. And the reduction between the first bill and the second was defunding the police. And Republicans, we need to deal with issues that have been brought forward. We need to deal with them. But Republican Party is not going to defund our police department.
And just to close here, anything that I may have failed to ask you that you wanted to speak?
I think we've covered it all. I really appreciate it. I really just appreciate the opportunity to serve the people of the secondary. It's such a beautiful place, and now that we're out and about in October, kind of limited, wearing masks and doing things we need to do, but just driving from my home in Bowling Green here this morning to see you, is just, you're seeing the leaves change and how stunningly beautiful this place is, how wonderful the people who live here are, and I'm just blessed. And I feel that way. When I go to D.C., I always tell myself, I'll know it's time to go when I land in D.C. and I don't look at the Capitol Dome. And every time I look up, I say, I cannot believe I get to work here. It's a special place, and I treat it that way. And I think most people who visited me in my office in D.C. on vacation or work or whatever they do, I know the broadcasters come to visit us in D.C. will say, hopefully they say, well, you treat us with respect and whatever. And I always say, you let me live and work in a special place, and I want you to feel how special it is too.
Great. Well, we wish you the best in November, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Brennan Crane, News Director for WCLU Radio. Thank you for watching this portion of our 2020 election coverage. Visit us at WCLUradio.com and online at Facebook and Twitter for the latest and breaking news updates.